Perfect. All right, well, it's 2:31, so should we start? We have a chat. Just wanted to read a chat that I had really quick. Okay. All right, so we have it recorded. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I'm Mallory Sheik, the Director of Accessibility Services at Central Lakes College in Brainerd, Minnesota. CLC, like other campuses across the state, have experienced a spike in nursing students with disabilities, both long-term and situational, during this pandemic. Our office wanted to host this training to help raise awareness and meet the needs of students. I would like to start by thanking Mayo Clinic for this training. Mayo Clinic recognizes in their own workforce the critical need right now for addressing self-care and resources during this pandemic. They believe strongly in early intervention and being proactive. Therefore, Mayo Clinic has offered this training at no cost. I would also like to thank Jody Nation, who has graciously provided us her time and energy in presenting this training for us today. Jody Nation is a master's level licensed professional clinical counselor and has worked in the Mayo Employee Assistance Program for the past 10 years. Jody assists Mayo students and employees with a variety of life issues, including mental health, work, and relationship concerns. Jody also provides training to work units on a variety of topics, including burnout and compassion fatigue. I would like to quickly note that if you have something you would like Jody to address throughout the training, to please use the Q&A feature. And also please feel free to use the chat to connect with one another. We do have captioning services available as well. Please use the closed captioning option in the menu bar to gain access to the closed captioning. And lastly, this training is being recorded and will be sent out via email. Thank you and welcome, Jody.
Thanks for that introduction, Mallory. And I see that you have a question to address in terms of the sign language interpreter. So I'm going to let you take care of that.
Yes, okay, thank you.
And so, yes, self-care for the caretakers is a very timely topic, something we deal with a lot at Mayo, because historically, caretakers are the worst at taking care of themselves, because you're always worried about others' needs and trying to do your best to help others. So I really appreciate opportunities like this to talk about why it's so important for you to practice good self-care. And as Mallory said, I don't mind questions as we go through. You can type something in the Q&A. The chat feature, I want you to use more for yourself in terms of if there's ideas or thoughts you want to exchange, but I'm not going to be monitoring that. So again, if there's something you want me to share, a comment that you have or a question that you have, please put that in the Q&A. And at the end, we'll have more time for that as well. So these are our learning objectives for today. I'm really hoping that all of you will leave with some self-care strategies and ideas about how to implement them daily, increase your own self-awareness of when maybe you need to reach out for help. Also, just taking the moment to kind of reflect and recognize how the pandemic has impacted our individual ability to cope, and then understanding the role of resources and accommodations for students, and also talking about how that translates to the workplace as well. So you may be wondering why I have a picture of a frog taking up your whole screen. And some of you may have heard this analogy before, but I've never heard a better one, so I continue to use it. And that's if you have a frog and you place the frog in cold water and you boil that water slowly, the frog won't jump out. I know, very gross, right? It basically explodes because it acclimates to its environment. And the reason I use this analogy when thinking about stress and burnout is often that's our experience of it, meaning we acclimate to the world around us and we don't even know that we're kind of boiling over, burning up until it's too late, until we have something that kind of demands our attention. So I want to ask Mallory to put up a poll now, and I'm just curious for all of you who are on to kind of rate on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you think you're doing on making your own self-care a priority? And this just will help me kind of tailor some of the things that I'm talking about to know where everybody feels like they're at. So if you want to go ahead and just complete that poll really quickly, that would be great. I'm not sure, Mallory, do you see any poll results coming in?
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
12% have said 1, 26% say 2, 48 say 3, 15 say 4, and 0 say 5.
okay, perfect. Thanks everyone for taking the time to do that. If you want to go ahead and close that poll, Mallory, and we'll move on. I appreciate that, and good to know kind of where your fellow participants and students are at. Oh, and now I can see it too.
Sorry.
Great. No, that's perfect. Thank you. So I like to share this quote kind of in framing why we need to talk about self-care and why it needs to be a part of training programs. So not only do healthcare providers offer care, they care, and this is transformative. And now I'm not saying kind of that this is a bad thing, right? Or it's going to make you not function as well as you could. But I think it's important to have awareness that offering care does impact us. And I like this quote here, all of us who attempt to heal the wounds of others will ourselves be wounded. And now, again, I'm not saying this to make it seem like, oh my gosh, what I get myself into going into healthcare, not at all. But it's important that we're aware of it so that we're better able to take care of ourselves and really think about, how am I going to acknowledge something that was really stressful or something that maybe was traumatic to me? How am I going to shape that in a way that has meaning to me, that reinforces my purpose in healthcare, that helps me kind of recognize how I'm living the life that I want to live, that I'm being the type of care provider that I want to be. And I kind of like to share this really brief story because one of the things I talk to a lot of nurses at Mayo about, especially, is about compassion fatigue. And I share my own story of compassion fatigue really briefly just to illustrate this. And it happened early on. I was done with my bachelor's degree, working on my master's degree, and I was working in a shelter. And there was a little girl who just kind of stole my heart. And at the time, I would say I was definitely not a kids person. And trust me, now I know this was terrible boundaries. But at the time, I would have given anything to adopt this little girl. Like, my heart went out to her. And this was my first experience with mandated reporting. I had to complete a report because of some abuse that I believed was taking place that the mother had disclosed to me. And so I thought I really did a good thing. I thought, I'm keeping this little girl safe. And I happened to make a follow-up call, that same evening into the home. And who should answer but the person who was accused of abusing the little girl. And I remember going home just sobbing that night, thinking, gosh, I did everything right and I couldn't protect her. I couldn't keep her safe. And after a little bit of reflection on that, I had to ask myself, okay, what kind of perspective am I going to put this into so that I can do this job forever, so that this can be my career? And it's really come down to me personally being able to say, I need to know that I do my part, and I do my part to the best of my ability. And sometimes that has to be enough, and that I'm planting that seed. And for all of you in healthcare, thinking about when you have a case that really hits close to home, that kind of tugs at your heartstrings, what kind of perspective are you putting that into so that you can continue to feel good about the work that you do, even if the outcome isn't always what you want it to be? And so that's one of the challenges, I think, with self-care is in healthcare, we're faced with a lot of those types of decisions and a lot of those types of situations. So these are some wellness strategies that I think really can help with that, to connect with your core values and purpose. Again, kind of how do you define that for yourself? And how are you living those values each and every day? Also, the idea of practicing responsible selfishness. In healthcare, we tend to be kind of what I would refer to as yes people, meaning we want to help, we want to do extra, we really work hard at doing a good thing. So taking the time to examine what's on your plate and decide, okay, if this comes on, what needs to come off? And sometimes I talk to my clients individually about this idea of a 24-hour rule, meaning don't say yes or no to any commitment until you've had 24 hours to think about it. And I think about maybe student organizations you're involved in, other volunteer opportunities that you're taking advantage of while you're a student. What happens when you're really good at something? And you can maybe share this in the chat, and I won't read them all, but the idea is a lot of times when we're really good at something, we get asked to do more, right? Especially in a volunteer organization. If you do good work, what else could you do? And I've heard this said many times, and I believe there's a lot of truth to it. If you want something done, ask the busiest person you know. So really, again, taking this idea of examining what's on your plate, practicing delegation where you can, trying hard to find time for yourself every day, even if it has to be many things on certain days. Like, I'm going to listen to my favorite song before I go into my house, or I'm going to, take 10 minutes to read something for fun versus something for school. Again, thinking about what recharges you, what gives back. Also having a transition from work to home, or in your case, maybe from school to home, giving yourself permission that I can kind of shut down, I can kind of relax a little bit. Some people change their clothes and have that kind of be their transition. Other people might touch like a tree or a bush on your way into your home and saying, you know what, I'm hanging everything from the day out there. It'll still be there when I get back, and then I can pick it back up. Also practicing the art of saying no or saying yes, meaning if you notice that, gosh, I've been saying no to my friends a lot lately or to my family a lot lately, I want to really challenge myself to say yes and do the things or connect in the ways that I can. Or again, giving yourself permission, you know what, it's okay if I don't take on this extra thing in a volunteer organization. It's okay. Someone else can do some of this. I don't need to feel like the burden is all on me. Remembering to laugh, really taking the time to kind of enjoy that sense of humor. And some of you maybe have already got this, or for those of you doing your clinicals and different rotations, maybe you feel that sometimes healthcare can get kind of a dark sense of humor. I think there's definitely some truth to that. And just taking the time to laugh and find some things that are funny, not taking ourselves so seriously all the time. Cultivating positive support. Negativity really breeds negativity. So meaning sometimes it is helpful to vent. I'm not saying you should never vent, but a lot of times you might find that you feel worse when you're done. If you're talking about a particular class or something, you're talking about how awful it is in the assignments. Do you leave there feeling like hopeful, rejuvenated, I'm ready to tackle this? Or do you kind of leave there feeling like deflated or down? And so thinking about who can help me? Yes, who can listen to my worries and my stress, but then who can help me turn that around? Finding those positive support people is really helpful. Finally, know your triggers and what impacts you. Meaning, if you know that, gosh, I get really stressed whenever I have to do a presentation, maybe public speaking isn't your thing, or knowing that, oh, this time of year gets me because maybe it's an anniversary of a significant event, or this type of patient I interact really affects me because it reminds me of somebody I know or of a previous situation. Again, knowing those triggers and what impacts us can help us prepare and be proactive about our self-care and about our coping. These are some additional self-care tips, really to try to find ways to include relaxation every day. And if I took the time to poll all of the participants that are here today, chances are I'm going to get a wide variety of answers. What's relaxing for some is for another, right? So really trying to figure out what works for you. And if you don't know the answer to that yet, that's okay. But then it's a really great time to explore and say, you know what, am I going to try the Headspace app for meditation as an example? Or am I going to try some progressive muscle relaxation? Or am I going to make it a point to take a walk or listen to some calming music? Again, thinking about what that means for you. Exercise regularly. I know you've probably gotten preached at that from a lot of different angles. Reason I always include it on talks like this is because of the amount of research that's shown its effectiveness on stress and anxiety, but also on depression, which can be closely tied to kind of burnout symptoms. So eating healthy, getting enough sleep, really just round out self-care. I really think about it in terms of how are you setting yourself up for success every day? Are you starting each day at a deficit? Or are you starting each day kind of in the best position that you could be in? Also, the idea of setting boundaries, and boundaries can mean a lot of different things. So I like to kind of give a couple examples here. One boundary, may be around your social media, like who am I friends with? Who do I follow? Those kinds of things can be boundaries. Or another example is around our schedule, and something that might be very concrete, but easy to understand is to say, Wednesdays are a date that I don't take anything else on. Wednesdays are my me day. That can be an example of a boundary. But thinking about how do I set these around kind of my life so that I'm somewhat protected and not letting everything in all of the time. Participating in activities you enjoy. I know that can be really low on our priority list when we're busy. It doesn't feel like there's any time, but I like to share this idea of a battery analogy. So meaning if you give and you give and you give, and you aren't taking anything back, pretty soon you're drained, you're empty. right? In the recycling bin you go. And I don't want that to happen to any of you. So it's really important to say, you know what? I know I have a lot to do, but I think I'm going to be more productive if I take that half an hour walk, or if I go play with my dog, or if I take the time to connect with a friend over the phone. Whatever it is that recharges you, I encourage you to think about it kind of like that energy, the recharging of the battery. Finally, learning how to manage stress, having a really good plan for all of the time so that when something stressful does happen, it doesn't impact us as negatively. You know, I think about this sometimes. I use the analogy, and it's unfortunate with all of the COVID stuff, this might dilute my analogy a little bit, but I think about stress management and resiliency much like getting a flu shot. We do that to boost our immunity, right? And it's the same concept when we have a good stress management plan. When life is stressful or throws us curveballs, it impacts us in a much less negative way when we've already done stuff to boost our immunity or resiliency, as you might refer to it. And thinking about, if, gosh, what I used to do isn't working as well for me anymore, or it's not working at all, okay, back to the drawing board. What do I need to do different to kind of restore that sense of peace? And a lot of times you'll hear me talk about this idea of a sense of inner peace versus balance, because to me, balance implies that there should be some kind of equality, right? That things should even out. And that's just not always the case. But that inner peace, what does it take for you to feel peaceful, and really striving to have that? I also like to share this slide, success. It's not always what you see, because I think that sometimes we need to think about kind of wins or victory success differently. So maybe meaning on a test, you didn't score the way you wanted to, and it's disappointing and it can feel defeating. But is there a different type of success? Do you really get a concept now that maybe you didn't before, that you know you can apply, even if it didn't translate to success on that test? Or I think about patient interactions too. We never know when we're planting a seed or when we're kind of helping a patient have a realization later. I know that I used to work in day treatment, mostly with conduct disordered youth. And through the power of Facebook, a few years ago, I got a message from somebody that I used to work with. And this person said, "Jody, I just wanted you to know that I didn't end up in prison." And I thought for a moment, what the heck did I say to this person? And I sure hope I was more eloquent than saying that. But this person went on to explain to me that I took the time to have a conversation with them. And I really reassured them that I had hope and faith and belief in their future. And they went on to share with me all of the really cool things they're doing now and the success they've had in life. And they just wanted to thank me for that talk. And I thought, wow, thinking back, I don't even remember that talk, for one thing. And you know, at the time, I certainly didn't know how impactful it was. And I think all of you today that are watching as future care providers are going to have opportunities like that where you impact someone in a way that you can never know in the moment, but reminding yourself that you're planting seeds for success. And again, not all success is as clearly defined. Some of it's a personal success, right? It's a personal win, regardless of maybe a score on a test or a score on a project, whatever it may be. So I like to share this exercise because I'm all about interventions that you can do in 5 minutes or less, because I know you're really busy. And unfortunately, I'd love to tell you that that gets better, but I think we just keep getting busier, right? So this is an exercise that can help in terms of boosting scores on mood scales. That's why the authors kind of created it, looking for an intervention that would be helpful with that. So the process is very simple. At the end of each day, you write down 3 positive things that happened and why they happened. And that why is really important, because that why is what tends to create appreciation, and appreciation is what tends to create happiness. So meaning if I say today, oh, my breakfast was really good. Why? Maybe because someone else made it for me, and that gives me appreciation for that person. Or maybe the good thing that happened is I did score really well on a test or a paper. Why? Because I put in a lot of work or effort, right? Gives yourself a pat on the back. So again, they're not always huge things. Some days you're going to have bigger celebrations, obviously, but other days it might not be the big things, but those little things. And doing this, even for as little as a week solid, has been shown to really be beneficial in terms of how we're wired to look at things. Because when we think about it, it makes sense that we only look for the negative a lot of times, because that's what needs our attention. That's what we need to fix. But that can be detrimental when it goes too far. So really taking the time to look for the positive, challenging our brain to start seeing more of the good can be a really nice kind of self-care strategy, a really nice emotional health kind of piece. Positive self-talk is another thing that can really help with our emotional well-being. And it's a very kind of simple idea in terms of identifying negative thoughts and practicing reframing those thoughts. So it's really about thinking about, what is that inner dialogue telling you? What kind of messages do you give yourself? And a lot of times, many will find that this can be pretty negative. Like if you don't do good on a test, as an example, do you start to beat yourself up and say, oh, I'm never going to graduate. I'm never going to finish this program. There's no way I could possibly be a good nurse in the future. And you really spiral and it gets really negative. But yet if one of your friends or co-students said, gosh, I didn't do well, and they started to spiral like that, you'd probably give them a really great pep talk. You'd probably say things like, oh my gosh, you'll do better next time. You're going to be a phenomenal nurse. Like, right? You would convince them, you would build them up. But we don't always do that for ourselves. So the idea behind kind of reframing is to take the time to write down that negative thought so it doesn't spiral, and follow it up with what's a more helpful reframe. So in the example I just used, it might be saying, you know what, I really didn't do well on that test. I'm really worried about my academic future. So your more helpful thought might be, well, I didn't do as well as I wanted to, but I'm going to meet with my professor and work to figure out where I went wrong. Or I'm going to get a tutor and do this. Or I know I didn't study as much as I could because I was working. I'm going to try to adjust my work schedule, right? So it's not trying to necessarily argue with yourself, but it's having that more helpful replacement thought. So I hope those make sense to people. And it's something that if you have ones that are really hard for you to reframe, or maybe you have some that you've used for yourself that you want to share in the chat, you can certainly do that. And at the end, or now, if anyone has one in the Q&A that they want to ask me about, happy to do that. But kind of the idea, again, is to keep those negative thoughts from spiraling, from blowing up to be bigger things, and replacing them with that more helpful thought. And writing it down is a really powerful way to help kind of build new connections in our brain. Don't say anything to yourself that you wouldn't say to anyone else. I know that sounds really backwards from what we're used to hearing, but again, we tend to be our own worst critics. So trying to monitor that so that we're, again, being more helpful to ourselves versus kind of dragging ourselves down and beating ourselves up for maybe things that are no longer in our control or that we can't change. Just taking the time to monitor that. Remember that attitude is a choice to look for the good in yourself as well as others. And this can be really hard to do when we're feeling kind of burnt out, or we're feeling really worn down, or that maybe we're having some depressive kind of thoughts. But it's important sometimes to say, oh, what's a 30-second timeout that I could take for gratitude maybe? That's one way to kind of shift perspective. Another thing that you can do at times is just, again, force yourself to not look for the negative. So reminding yourself that what's an alternative perspective? What's a different way I could look at the situation can be helpful. Because if we allow ourselves, we can always find something wrong with a lot of different situations. So that's kind of one way to push ourselves to find those alternative perspectives through positive self-talk. I want to talk to you about flexibility and why it matters. Because I think this is one of the best self-care tools and helps so much with resiliency and in so many different realms of our life. So the benefits of flexibility, I kind of tongue-in-cheek, and it's kind of like a bad dad joke, so forgive me, but there's fewer injuries, right? When we're flexible, we have less injuries. And I mean that in terms of like psychological, emotional injuries as well. Because when we're able to kind of roll with things, adapt quickly, we don't get caught up in that kind of cycle of self-doubt and negativity, of putting ourselves down, of looking at only the bad, because we look for it as an opportunity. And really amazing things happen when we are open to them. I was telling Mallory before we started this, I did a webinar yesterday and I had a dog barking outside loudly the whole time. It was awful. I was so embarrassed. I was waiting for a bunch of people to drop off, and thankfully they didn't. But what ended up happening was an opportunity, meaning we re-recorded this webinar this morning in smaller chunks that we're going to package differently that we think is going to be more beneficial to our employees. So the end result turned out to be better than our original plan, but at the moment it sure didn't feel that way. And so finding these opportunities to be flexible and flexible with our plans, like if we know we can't do some of the things we used to do, with our friends, with our family, thinking about, how could this work? Kind of transitioning to that next bullet point. Instead of thinking why something won't work, think about how could it work? Can we do this outside? Can we do this with less people? How do we get a big enough space, right? Kind of all of those COVID considerations right now. And by being flexible, it allows you to live in the moment, right? You don't get stuck up, you don't get hung up on thinking about how awful something is or how this didn't happen the way you wanted it to, but you're allowed to really live in that moment and say, what's my lifetime solution? What's the opportunity that I can see? And this is where it helps with that perspective taking. What's an alternative way to look at this that might be more helpful to me that still allows me to get my goal met? I do want to talk about warning signs to seek additional support, because I think it's important that we don't ignore these things and that you know you're not alone if you find yourself experiencing any of these symptoms. So if you find that you're having a real challenging time managing emotions, especially in a way that's out of character for you, it's a lot of crying, or maybe it's like anger outbursts, but just a real change, that can be one symptom. If you have a change in appetite one way or another, right, like eating too much or eating too little, disrupted sleep patterns, again, same, where you're sleeping too much or sleeping too little. Difficulty with motivation, especially on things that normally you would like to do. Like if you normally love to take your dog for a walk and you find that you don't want to do that, those types of things can all be warning signs to seek additional support. Probably the biggest red flag on this list is thoughts of self-harm. If you're having any of those, we want you to reach out for support right away. We take those very seriously. Somatic symptoms. So a lot of times our body lets us know that something is going wrong before our brain ever does. And so you might find that, oh, I'm having a lot of headaches lately, or neck aches, or I'm having a lot of GI issues, and that's not normal for me. A lot of times that's our body's way of trying to get our brain to pay attention and say, hey, you're under a lot of stress here. I need you to slow down and pay attention to some of this stuff. Also, increased substance use. And I'm not talking about necessarily abuse, but I'm talking about a change in your use pattern that's concerning. I've had a lot of nurses, for example, talk to me about how they know they're in trouble is when they come off night shift and they feel like they have to have a drink before they can go to bed. And now it's one drink. So it wouldn't kind of meet substance abuse criteria by any means, but they themselves know that that's not normal or something they want to be engaging in. That's a warning sign for them. So again, thinking about your patterns, if you kind of notice that I'm using more than I would before, or at times that aren't normal for me, that can be a warning sign. And I think about other addictive behaviors like gambling or shopping. I have some people who tell me they clean when they're stressed. I always wish that was like one of my coping strategies. Unfortunately, it's not. But again, anything that you notice that gives you a sign that says, I'm not doing as well as I could, that's a good time to reach out for additional support. We all have a history, and knowing what that is, and again, what triggers us can be really helpful, especially being in the healthcare field. Knowing what your trauma inputs are, meaning, gosh, I know it's really hard for me to work on babies, as an example. Or if someone reminds me of a grandparent that I lost, that can be, really heart-wrenching for me, or that's easier for me. Or maybe it's somebody who, you had a tough experience with, and working on a patient like that makes it more challenging. But knowing what those things are can be helpful. And also, again, knowing your triggers, like if certain things kind of come together, and that makes it more difficult to cope. Like maybe you had a really hard time sleeping the night before, and that causes you to not perform at your top level, or something is going on with your family that's causing your kind of attention to be divided. Again, any of those kinds of things that let you know things aren't going as well as they could are important to kind of slow down, pay attention to, and decide, what am I going to do about this? So areas of impact, and Mallory, if you want to go ahead and put up the poll, that would be great. I want to talk about some of the areas that have been impacted during the pandemic, and I'm going to ask if we get the poll up here, just for all of you to check as many as apply, and you might find that all of them have been impacted. But thinking about routine, many of us have a very different routine than what we used to have. Whether that be going to classes in person versus now all online, a change in kind of how we anticipated maybe taking our clinicals. Instead of going to multiple areas, we're only allowed into one. Thinking again about all of those different pieces. work. If any of you are working while going to school, chances are that looks very different, just in terms of even needing to wear a mask and having more limited interaction with people. Home life for many has changed. Recreation, so many limits on what we're allowed to do and not do at this time for safety reasons. Our faith communities and school communities probably look quite a bit different. Many people are really more of celebration in terms of getting together for holidays and with their bigger extended family. Maybe other months celebrated with friends or family just doesn't feel like you can do that at the same level now. Also, the ability to grieve. For any of you who have lost a loved one during this time, you may find it really challenging to have any sense of closure because we aren't allowed to have a funeral in the same way. Or maybe there's important people that have passed that you feel like, gosh, I haven't really even been able to express condolences in person to their loved ones, and that can be difficult. Also, opportunities to give back or volunteer. A lot of events that people normally would participate in, aren't happening anymore. Mallory, do you want to go ahead and show the results if they will show up? Perfect. So it looks like the vast majority of you checked most things in terms of work, home routine, recreation, celebrations. Looks like they were the biggest ones. Thanks for putting that up there, Mallory. And so again, you may even have additional areas that have been impacted, but giving yourself a moment to kind of pause and reflect on those and just recognize that there's a lot of stress that's associated with that. And sometimes we have to employ our coping skills. And again, that flexibility of, okay, how am I going to do this different? How am I going to have my needs met in a different way? So really encourage people to set realistic expectations for yourself and really to consider looking at your life as it is now. Often we want to kind of compare it to what it was pre-pandemic and say, well, I should be able to do this or it should look like that. And that sets us up for really unrealistic expectations and for failure in a way. So really taking the time to look at your life as it is now and what makes the most sense. Also being creative with how you fit things in. Maybe you used to have a really great exercise routine and your schedule has changed at school along with your work schedule or something. Maybe saying, what, I need to do 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night, and my weekends I get a little bit longer time. Or thinking about maybe some roles have changed. I talk to parents a lot about this. Parents who feel like, gosh, I used to play music every week and I just don't feel like I can anymore. So is it a matter of, well, I'm going to sing some lullabies and songs, but I still can play my guitar, or I'm going to let my toddler bang on some pots and pans and join in on the session. Sometimes it's really about being creative about how you fit those things in that are important to you and not having such clear expectations. Like I have to do this for an hour as an example. Maybe it's, I can do this for 20 minutes now and 20 minutes later, or maybe it's 30 minutes is all I have today. And that's okay. Really just being creative with how you do that. Also, don't be afraid to try experiments, especially for those of you who maybe say, gosh, I don't really do a lot of self-care. I don't know what works for me. So say, this week I'm going to try meditation. I'm going to make it a goal to try it 4 or 5 times this week and see what I think. And I'm going to reevaluate and decide, is this right for me or not? And it's not about failing. It's not about it being bad that something doesn't work. It's just the idea that I'm really putting a concentrated and focused effort into my own self-care. And if that doesn't work, I'm looking at that as something that I learned, not something I failed at, but something that I learned. And that can go with any type of hobby. Like maybe you're like, I'm going to try some art classes, or I'm going to do some woodworking. And you decide they're not for you. That's okay. Just don't be afraid to try those experiments. Also really work to focus on what's not canceled, meaning we can get really hung up on the idea that, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, this is closed, I can't gather with these people. So really think about, okay, what can I do? Kind of like I said in the previous slide, instead of saying how this won't work, how could this work? So really thinking about the idea that, okay, maybe I need to have a theme night and I'm going to get together with my friends and we're going to do this via Zoom. That might be something because, again, that's not canceled. That connection isn't canceled. So focusing on that. Also trying to remember that there isn't any pressure to come out of the pandemic with a new skill. If you're really not interested in pursuing a hobby because you've got enough of your own, or you don't feel like that's the time for you to do that, that's okay. Or you don't have a super organized or clean house after this is all over, that's okay too. To me, it's really about setting those realistic expectations that help you find that sense of peace. What is it that you need for that idea of inner peace, that somewhat of a balance type concept that makes sense to you? And if you find that, gosh, I don't feel that way right now, what am I doing to help me get there? And what am I going to try? Kind of where the experiments come in. So it doesn't feel like this is the only thing I can try, that I know that I can try lots of different things. So you may be wondering, okay, why is she showing me a picture of a cup? And it's because you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's something as caregivers, all of you need to think about. What am I doing to kind of fill my own cup so that I'm able to help others? You may have heard the oxygen analogy mask used before, meaning in a plane, if it's going down, whose mask do they tell you to put on first, right? It's yours. And it's much the same with our own self-care. We have to take care of ourselves so that we're able to provide the level of care to our patients that we would like to. And that can be really hard to make ourselves a priority, and sometimes thinking about, what, if I take that time for a walk, that makes me a better partner, that makes me a better caregiver, that makes me a better student or a better classmate, whatever kind of it is. Sometimes reframing it for ourselves about how we're doing this not only benefits ourselves, but it also benefits those around us can be helpful. Connection is really key, especially now. I think more and more people that I talk to feel disconnected. They're not feeling kind of surrounded by that sense of community, even informal community. Maybe you always used to get coffee every morning at a certain place and the person knew your name, for example, a real informal connection, but yet it felt good. Or even I've missed just being able to smile at people in the subway. Like, yes, you can smile with your eyes, but it's not the same as smiling with your whole face and having it covered by a mask, right? So finding ideas for how to connect kind of in the world we're living in right now. And I'm going to share some ideas kind of about connection in terms of getting creative with that. Joining an online community is an example, having themed nights with your friends via Zoom, thinking about just video chatting with someone, making the time to do that you haven't connected with for a while. But we all know that sometimes those things aren't enough and we still need to reach out for help. So really encourage people, when needed, engage your support system. If you feel like your support system isn't as strong as you'd like it to be, start thinking about, okay, how can I maybe build some new connections? Are there things that I can get involved in, activities I can, people who, maybe are an acquaintance level that I can work to find some commonality with so that I can kind of take our relationship to the next level. Also thinking about using your positive coping skills, reminding yourself about what's worked in the past and revisiting some of those, or again, trying that idea of an experiment and starting some new activities. Really just working to reestablish that sense of balance. I wanted to share this plan because they have a nice guide for nurses, and for those of you who aren't future nurses, it's very applicable to all caregiving positions. But the idea is have a plan, meaning don't expect it just to happen. We need to be very intentional with our self-care and making that a priority. You can also take advantage of programming in terms of what's being offered. All of you today are taking care of a webinar that's being offered as an example. What other opportunities are out there for you to learn or grow or connect with others, taking advantage of those things. You can also contact student services or another counseling organization if you feel like I really need, to speak with someone individually. There's also like warm lines available for the state of Minnesota. NAMI has a lot of really great support groups as well. You can also contact the accessibility or disability services on your campus, again, to get ideas of where to connect. So really take the time to reach out for help if you feel like I'm just not doing as well as I'd like to be or as well as I could be. We want to talk about kind of knowing your resources and the idea of, would accessibility or disability services help me? So these are some common accommodations that can happen at the college level. Quiet testing space, having extended test time, alternative formats for text, electronic readers on tests, sign language interpreters. And keeping in mind that asking for these does not lower academic standards or compromise the integrity of you getting through your program. It's really just a sign of knowing what I need for supportive services that help me achieve kind of on a level playing field. So really don't be afraid to reach out for help for those. I'm going to go through just some common kind of diagnoses of why someone might reach out in case this resonates with anyone watching. So, many people reach out for mental health reasons. So anxiety or panic disorders are common. And I also do want to caution that just if you have, some test anxiety or things, that doesn't necessarily mean it reaches a level of a disorder, but it might mean that, gosh, I benefit from talking to like a academic success coach about how to manage test anxiety, or having a couple sessions with a counselor to talk about that. One of the things that I love about my job, kind of being an internal assistance program within Mayo, is, I don't have to diagnose to help people with kind of normal life adult issues. It's normal to have some of these kind of symptoms, but if we feel like it crosses the line to where it's detrimental, then it can be really helpful to reach out. So also depression, ADHD, PTSD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, any of those might be kind of common diagnoses that your accessibility and disability office would be familiar with. And this is just a few examples. There's many more, obviously. And kind of systemic reasons: traumatic brain injuries, diabetes, cancer, lupus, Crohn's, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy. Again, just kind of throwing out some things to give you an idea of what we're talking about. But if you're experiencing something that isn't on this list, I still encourage you to reach out if you feel like an accommodation might be helpful. Other common diagnoses like learning disabilities, and a wide array of them: dyslexia, mobility, blind or limited vision, deaf or hearing loss, speech or language concerns, an intellectual disability. Any of those things, again, are all things your local office could help you with. And again, if we didn't touch on something that was on the list that you're experiencing, I just encourage you to reach out. And Mallory has volunteered that if anyone has a real specific question, that they can reach out to her. I think she was going to put her contact information in the chat, or if you obviously are from a different school, though, she'll kind of direct you to where you need to go, but at least can answer that basic question, because we know sometimes reaching out to something that's unfamiliar can be a challenge. So I want to talk about how this all translates to success in the workplace. So the biggest thing that I find for people, kind of new employees coming into Mayo, is really kind of forgetting about their self-care plan when they start a new job. And I'd say that's one of the biggest priorities that you need to have that in place and follow that, because there's a lot of stress with learning a new role, meeting new people, trying to be successful, carving out your niche. So making sure that you have that self-care plan, and that if you find that, gosh, this worked really well for me in school, but it's just not translating the same to my life or to my schedule right now, looking at how do I adjust this. Also knowing your support. So really not only your personal support, but where else can I go for support? So like most employers, and as an example, have an employee assistance program. They're not all internal like Mayo's is, but they have counselors available for you to talk to. So that would be like a next level of support. Your leadership is also often a level of support, but I know that can be intimidating sometimes to go to them. So finding a mentor or a colleague who can be helpful. And really to think about, if accommodations have been helpful in the past, think about what translates to the workplace. Or I also think about what was helpful to you in terms of learning that can translate to the workplace. I recently worked with a fairly new grad who was starting a nursing career. And during nursing school and during clinicals, this person had always taken ADHD meds, but had decided not to take them when starting the workplace. And you can guess how well that went. It's pretty rough to start out with. But when talking about how this person was successful in the past and how that translated to the workplace, they were able to re-implement those things and successfully get off of orientation. And so again, even thinking about how you learn and sharing that with others, thinking about, what helps you cope with stress or anxiety so that you can function, because we all know what it feels like to have someone watching our every move or grading us, critiquing us. That can be very intimidating when starting a new job. So thinking about, okay, what was helpful for me that before? Did I take a run before I would go into those situations, or after those situations? Do I meditate? Do I make sure that I connect with one of my best friends? Again, whatever it might be, knowing what's been helpful to you in the past is a really powerful way to set yourself up for success in the future. So just encourage you to think about that in terms of how you're successful in the workplace. So I want to transition to any questions and answers that anyone has. I'm sorry, I hopefully will have the answers, but I want to transition to questions that anyone might have, and you can use the Q&A, or I believe, Mallory, you can turn on video or microphone now for anyone, right?
Yes. Yep.
So either way, whatever people are more comfortable with, if anyone has any questions. And Mallory, was there anything from the chat that I should?
No, there wasn't anything in the chat.
Okay.
And if anybody has a question, if you want to raise your hand, it'll kind of indicate to me that I can then give you the option to unmute.
And I know that it can be intimidating to ask questions in a big group, so that's completely fine if no one has any. Again, just reminding you of your local resources and reaching out and connecting with Mallory or someone on your own campus if you have any questions. Because what I find and what I tell a lot of my employees when I'm doing orientations is I don't always have the answers, myself directly, but I know where you can go to get them. So if I can't directly help you solve your problem, chances are I can help get you in the right door to solve it. And I would guess that's very much the same as Mallory's and others' roles on college campuses, that they're aware of resources. And we don't care what door you go in, we just want you to reach out if needed. And again, thinking about your self-care as a student and then your self-care as an employee, because you're choosing a very rewarding career, but it's also a very demanding career. So with that, if there aren't any questions or comments that anyone has, I guess we'll give you back some of your time today. And I thank those of you who joined and stuck it out to the end for your time and attention and participation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jody, for offering this and being a part of this. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I think, Mallory, you can just stop the record.
Okay. Okay. And then Sarah from the chat said, thank you for your time.
Nice. All right. Well, all of you have a good rest of your day. Thanks for signing, everyone.
Yeah.
I had a hard time not looking at you sometimes. I wanted to look. It's so beautiful.
I know.
And I'm like, is that how I want to be more animated now?
I know. I love it. Well, thank you, Jody. We do really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Kristen.
Have a great day,
You're welcome.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.